I'd like to introduce her. So meet our speaker, Amanda, and she is a licensed clinical social worker and mental health therapist. She is an associate professor at Sacramento State and USC, and is also the founder and CEO of Counseling Collab. So I recommend going to her website and checking out all the other great work she does. In her spare time, she helps us. So we are privileged to have her here. She does work with a lot of your groups already. You may know her from other venues and other trainings. But I'm so excited for her to talk with you all today about the importance of self-care and what to do about it in this virtual world that we're in. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Amanda, and you'll see me later on. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Heather. So good to be with all of you. I recognize those that I can see on camera and some names. So strange to think about how much the world has changed since we last gathered, and how important self-care is, and how much we've had to adjust and how different it is now. So we'll go ahead and jump right in. If we could get the next slide, and you can go to the next one. Yeah. Okay, so our agenda today, we're going to really look at the impact of chronic toxic stress, because at this point, we are so many months into the pandemic, amidst a lot of other things going on in the world. But at this point, we're in what professionals would consider a chronic state of stress. And it's important to understand how stress affects our bodies. We're going to also talk about self-regulation and self-soothing when we're in uncertain times, and then look at adaptation, resiliency, and finding meaning and joy. Next slide. And I just wanted to say to my helpers, if it's time for a poll and I forget, just interrupt me.
It's time for a poll.
Okay, let's do the poll before we get into the stress syndrome stuff. All right, so please go ahead and click your answer. Which of the following have you been most affected by? Quarantine, the concept of COVID time, losing track of days and weeks, sense of time feels kind of off, COVID wall, feeling like you've hit the wall, trouble feeling like you can get through this, COVID brain, forgetfulness, feeling like you're dropping the ball. So which one have you been most affected by? And while those answers are coming in, I'll go ahead and start talking about the general adaptation syndrome. So we'll break down these phases in the next slides, but I know we're so used to seeing graphs of spikes and downward turns, and I know we all wish we were looking at our local COVID data and that we were seeing a downward turn, and we're in a bit of a spike. But when you look at this, this has to do with how you manage the fatigue and the toxicity of stress and your resistance to stress. So we often will have a spike in the beginning and we can resist for a long time, and then we usually will go into a state of exhaustion. Next slide. And looks like we've got our results in, and it looks like most people in this group are feeling like they've got the COVID brain, so feeling more forgetful, like you're dropping the ball, and then losing track of time. So that's interesting, and we'll see how stress affects our brain functioning. So thank you for that. So we've got this alarm stage of stress, like thinking back to when this all was happening. We would have had elevated cortisol levels and DHEA elevation as well, which is what regulates your hormones in your adrenal system. And when you're in that alarm stage, these are actually good things to be happening because it helps you to respond in the point of crisis. But you may have noticed that maybe you were feeling like your blood sugar was off, or having trouble even eating at that acute stress phase, having gastrointestinal issues, and some beginning of sleep issues. That's usually what we see in this alarm stage of stress. Next slide. And then when we go into the stage of resistance, we continue to have elevated cortisol levels. That's the stress hormone. But then the hormonal and adrenal gland system starts to decrease a little bit. So we don't have as much of that fight or flight energy when we're just trying to get through a difficult time. Epinephrine also will be increased at this time, so it can help you sustain the energy to get through that middle phase of the stress response. We usually will see continued sleep issues at this time. And then some people who've had chronic stress over their lifetime sort of stay here. So this kind of ties back to what we talked about last year, perhaps with some of our own personal lives or clients with having early adverse childhood experiences or other stress where you haven't caught a break from it really ever, and you just kind of stay in this phase, but all along you're having these hormonal changes and stress hormones, which over time with chronic health could lead to a chronic health condition. Next slide. And then when we get to the exhaustion, this is really the body's loses that ability to adapt. What we saw in the first two stages is really how we adapt to stress. And if we do hit exhaustion, we may actually burn out. Our bodies may just really need rest. And this is usually when people will start to actually have an illness or a sickness that comes on. Hopefully what we'll learn today is to listen a little bit to our bodies and our nervous system so we can shorten the period of time of exhaustion or pay attention to it. And then at this point, everything's just low. So that stress hormone that was helping, or chemical that was helping you get through it, is gone. You don't have a lot of adrenaline. You're just very flat and exhausted and really fatigued. Fatigue is different than exhaustion. It feels very heavy. It's difficult to sometimes even get out of bed when someone's really fatigued, and push through to the staying back into the resistance phase. We'll often see increased allergies at this time, and then full-on insomnia. So not even be able to sleep through the night at all. And then interesting salt cravings. I don't know if anyone has noticed that about themselves, if they've ever experienced burnout and fatigue at this level, but it kind of makes sense when you think of salt being something that you're craving something that gives you energy, because we're always adapting as humans, and we're going to want to try to fight or even maybe be in denial if we're really in this last stage of exhaustion. The good news is these are stages and phases, and we can do things about it to go between these stages. But I thought it was important to start out with really looking at specifically with quarantine, COVID, remote work, all of these things that we may be really starting to feel more of a burnout. Next slide. So many of you might have heard of this term, quarantine fatigue. This came out in May, this article, but I think it definitely applies right now, especially as we've had a couple of these moments where we feel like things are maybe getting better, or we can start to do more. And then we're going back into more restrictions. So we have to figure out, how can we live with this fatigue and figure out how we're going to continue to live our lives. So I definitely recommend reading this article and being real with yourself about the fatigue. And you think of other ways you deal with fatigue, right? If you're fatigued about something, or you're, maybe just using an analogy of those of you that exercise or work out, maybe you fatigued a certain muscle group, you'll take like a break from that. With quarantine, sometimes we don't always get that break, especially as we have the stricter restrictions coming down. But maybe you consider adjusting something that you're doing to just give yourself a little bit of a break from it. And I know people have been creative about what they've been doing during quarantine to continue to live their life. For example, maybe taking a socially distant walk with a friend, wearing your mask because you're feeling isolated. That would be a good example of how to cope with quarantine fatigue. So if you ever have anything that you want to put in the chat box about that, we would love to hear that.
And Amanda,
so-
we do have a second poll for this.
Okay, go for it. Thank you. Which of the new following words are you familiar with? And this one's a little fun. Maskne, doom scrolling, or endemic. So these are all words that are sort of have been created in the last months as we've been in quarantine. So if you have heard any of these words, go ahead and click what you've heard, and we'll see which one is. I'll let you guys fill that out, and then maybe we'll have to define them if some people haven't heard what they are. So I'll go ahead and say what they are, because I'm seeing in the chat that there's some people who haven't heard of it. So maskne is acne that's caused from wearing a mask. So some of you may have noticed that you may be like feeling like you're back in junior high with some pimples around your mouth from keeping a mask on. Doom scrolling is in some of the uncertain times we've gone through this year, is just scrolling through social media, being kind of focused on the scary negative information that's out there. And endemic is this idea that we keep waiting for the pandemic to end, but we feel like it's never going to end. So those are some of the new words that have come out that you kind of hear in conversation. So when you want to put the results up, you can put those up, but we'll go ahead and go to the next section, which is on self-soothing and self-regulation. So it looks like most people have heard of maskne. Oh, the new things that we get to live with. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so to tie this back a little bit to what we learned last year, and I know you guys are all practicing trauma-informed care as you're out doing your really important work. And I just wanted to acknowledge some of these things to give us a place of acknowledgement, because we talked a little bit about this last time. Sometimes when people are telling you self-care, it can kind of almost feel annoying, like someone being overly positive, or just thinking that, you can take a bath and all of your problems are going to melt away. So we want to be realistic that that's not what this is about. It's really about the tips and tricks and how to find resiliency and adaptation to situations. So we just want to acknowledge that we are in the midst of unprecedented times. We can hold a multitude of feelings all at the same time. That there's many responses to stress and uncertainty, and each one is valid. So really finding a non-judgmental stance for ourselves and whatever our stress responses are right now. And we acknowledge that there's no better opportunity to practice self-compassion and collective care than right now. So that means really practicing compassion with yourself, your colleagues, and with your community. This is the work. We acknowledge it's critical to have the need for reflection, inquiry, prioritizing the most critical needs that we have. Next slide. So all of this starts with the necessary magic of self-regulation. So even though we are very stressed out, we're in these unprecedented times, we are all human, and we all have a nervous system that we can learn how to regulate. So even in the toughest times, there are things that you can do to regulate yourself and feel somewhat better, even if it's just for a moment. Next slide. So last year in the trainings, we talked about a self-care plan. That's kind of how we ended last December. And there could be some things that maybe you identified. We had you guys also think about having an accountability partner for your self-care. Well, what have you lost the ability to do because of COVID-19? What ways have you gotten creative? So in the chat box, I'd love to hear if there's anything that you've lost the ability to do and ways that you've gotten creative. I know for myself, I used to really be an externalizer with self-care. I was always going outside of my home to work with other people to provide self-care. So I would like to go to a yoga class. And now I'm really into doing online yoga with a free class on YouTube called Yoga with Adrienne. That's one of my recommendations. I feel like I've really connected with this person on YouTube, and I have really developed a home-based yoga practice that's really fulfilling. Looks like someone else knows about yoga with Adrienne. So if you haven't checked it out, check it out. So yes, please add in the chat box, what have you gotten creative with? Because we want to hear from you. Next slide. So last time we talked about the polyvagal theory and understanding the different states of our nervous system. And we all have what's called a window of tolerance. And that's what we're always trying to achieve, especially when it comes to really effectively engaging in self-care. Because if you're not in your window of tolerance, you could be using self-care as a way to avoid your feelings. So it's really important that you are able to understand, what does it feel like in my body? What is my window of tolerance? When do I feel calm and connected? Can I actually identify feelings I'm having? Do I feel connected to myself? Am I able to emotionally regulate and self-soothe? Can I go between fight, flight, or freeze and a state of calm? Can I go between those states with relative ease? This is all when you're in your parasympathetic part of your nervous system. And just as a reminder, the sympathetic nervous system is the flight, fight, freeze, or submission part of our nervous system. But when we're in parasympathetic, we feel like we're safe, we can rest and digest and connect with others. So those are really the things you want to look for when you're in that window of tolerance. Next slide. So how do we know when we are emotionally dysregulated? So here are some signs of emotional dysregulation. You may have some of your own that are different than this, but kind of spaced out, not really there, not really feeling like you're in the room, in the conversation. It's hard to find words. You might feel kind of scattered. You may find that you get a little clumsier and trip or drop things or lose things. People will often have a flatter facial expression and vocal tone, where they're just kind of there and meh, kind of like that emoji with just the straight line. Some people may experience rage, so really intense experience of anger, and maybe the rage comes out like you're fine at work, you get through the day, and then somebody cuts you off on the freeway and you're just enraged driving. It's probably because you had some stress that you didn't get to process yet, and it comes out, it gets displaced onto the person on the freeway. Some people will feel like they can't feel certain parts of their body. They're so detached from their body, or they may have actual manifestations of numbness. Emotional flooding. So that is a really important thing to remember, because when we emotionally flood, then our prefrontal cortex shuts down, and it's really hard to have executive functioning, make decisions, communicate clearly. We all get emotionally flooded from time to time. It's part of being human. But when we are flooded, it can happen really quickly, where we shift emotional states. And it's hard, it can almost take us by surprise when this happens. It really feels like a flood of emotion or a wave of emotion coming over you. And then when adrenaline gets released, you may feel like a shock to your hips or your knees. I don't know about any of you, but if I ever see like a small child that's falling, my knees will quake and get like a sharp pain. And that's adrenaline surging because I think I need to, go help the child. And it can be a child I don't even know. It's just something about seeing that happens in my body. And then when you're in the state of emotional dysregulation, it's really difficult to expect clients or co-workers to engage with us in a healthy manner if we're dysregulated. So that's why I put that in the beginning about the necessary magic of your nervous system. It's okay to have any of this going on, and it's okay to do something about it, which we'll get to in our next slides, rather than trying to, stay focused in a Zoom call or a conversation if that's happening. So how do we go then into self-regulation? You want to notice it's happening. If any of those things on that list are happening, or maybe you'll add to it, just observe, oh, wow, I just had a shot of adrenaline in my knees. What do I need to do? Do I need to make any adjustments? So you're just noticing and observing in a non-judgmental way when these things are happening. Next slide. And then if your nervous system is getting activated, here are some things that you can do right in the moment to see if you can get through it without needing to do very much, just in your own body while you're engaging at work. So stop and ask yourself, what am I noticing, sensing, feeling? You can quickly do a body scan, which means just going from the top of your head all the way down your body to notice if you feel any discomfort. Noticing your sensory system. Do you smell anything? What can you see? Are you feeling anything on your skin? Notice your own body language. This is something we often do with clients or coworkers, but check in with your own body. How are you sitting? Are you showing with your body, how you're feeling? Eye gaze is something that has to do with attachment and connecting with others. So check and see, are you looking off to the side? Are you having trouble making eye contact? Where are you fixating your gaze? And when you're on Zoom or a telehealth appointment, something to keep in mind is I have to look at my camera to be making eye contact to you guys, but you're over to the right on my screen. And I think I'm even kind of looking to the right sometimes because I can see a couple of faces. But if I'm trying to connect with a client or coworker, I really want to look into the camera, which is something totally different than what we're used to, right? That's part of this virtual world we're living in. So just checking and making sure you're making eye contact with wherever your internal webcam or external webcam is. And then noticing if you're having any muscle twitching, tension, or breathing changes. Those can all be signs that you're going into an activation of flight, fight, or freeze, or coming out of your window of tolerance. Next slide. And then you want to check out the environment. So just pausing. I feel like that's the most important thing, especially if there's emotional flooding. Just stop for a second. Push that pause button and ask yourself, what is the cause? What are the elements of the situation? What's going on with you? What is your body or your emotions telling you? Have one of your values not been met? What is the story you're telling yourself about the situation? So those are all really important things to check in about, especially if your body is talking to you, as I like to say. If you're in maybe a tense staff meeting and you begin to perspire, ask yourself why. Like, are you picking up on something? Is it stressful? Are you feeling threatened? And then also with the values not being met, we talked a little bit last time about moral injury, which is when situation might be happening that is out of alignment with your values, that can be something that's really triggering and activating. Next slide. And then know that in any moment you are empowered to make an adjustment. So what do you need right now in this moment? Is there anything you can do to take care of yourself physically? Do you need to rest? Do you need to get up and move around? Do you need to eat something? Those are like in the moment right now, if someone was maybe needing to take a look at this. But in general, in your lifestyle, how is your sleep? How is your exercise? And how is your diet? We always are going back to looking at that. And then, do you have empathy for yourself? Have you stopped to say, wow, this is a lot. We've been going through a lot during COVID, or something specific happening in your family. Can you be empathetic with yourself? Can you be understanding? And then lastly, try a mindfulness technique. And we're going to demonstrate some of those in the next slides. Next slide. And we'll go to the next slide. All right, so self-regulation. That's really important to, we talked about, okay, what's going on in my nervous system? What do I need to do to regulate? If you are dysregulated, you definitely want to seek safety and not do something like drive or operate machinery, or, in this virtual world, do you need to go off camera? Do you need to stop what you're doing to just feel safe again? And again, safety is a sign that we're in our parasympathetic nervous system and that we're in our window of tolerance. And then try to, again, stop, breathe, and ground. This is also some communication tips for what you can say to maybe stop a conversation. I want to continue this conversation, but let's wait till we're both calm. Saying you need to use the restroom or need to step outside. And if you're on the phone and it's getting tense or you're getting activated, I have a call on the other line. Even if you don't, it's okay, because the call on the other line might be your subconscious saying, I need a break. Because again, we want to avoid continuing to engage if we're in a state of dysregulation. If anybody has anything to add in the chat box on things that you've said before when you've needed to remove yourself, feel free to add them, because I think there's some really creative ways that people can communicate this. Next slide. Okay, so specifically for virtual work, grounding techniques. This is something I highly recommend, that you have something textured under your desk and you take your shoes or your slippers off so that you can actually feel whatever's under your feet. There are like some of those stress balls with little spikes. There's little pads you can put down, or even just a rug or a carpet or a blanket, really anything that is a different texture than what you're used to feeling. That is going to help you to recognize that you're shifting out of your activated state and beginning a grounding technique. Another thing you can do is trace the room with your eyes, or if you can trace the room with a finger to actually touch the wall. So that gives you the sense of really knowing where you're at, because sometimes if we're really triggered, we could disassociate or really check out and not actually be where we are. And if you're exhausted and fatigued, and especially on Zoom calls, like it can get so dronesome and tiring, just to stay alert and active, just look around the room. Maybe you can do that right now, wherever you are. And then another thing to do with your feet is to just move your feet back and forth and say in your mind, right foot, left foot, right foot, left foot. So again, we're grounding, we're telling ourselves that we are safe in this moment. Another one that's very incognito is to just press your tongue on the back of your teeth. If you're in a situation where you've got a mask on, that kind of covers it up, but the tongue on the teeth is just a connection point in your sensory system. And then this is one of my favorite ones. I do this a lot with my clients in session after we've done a guided imagery or relaxation technique, is to just name one thing you can see, one thing you can touch, taste, smell, and hear. So that's going to put you right in the moment of wherever you are. So if you want to do that to yourself right now, try it out. Also, eating something rich in protein will help you to feel grounded. If you are, missed a meal or whatever, think about having a snack that's rich in protein. And then washing hands. Now we've got hand sanitizer, actually using that as a mindful moment. You've got 20 seconds, you're supposed to be washing your hands or using hand sanitizer. So actually notice how that water feels, how the soap smells, how the hand sanitizer feels. There's so many different ones out there that we're experiencing, and they all have a little bit of a different smell. So even if it's just for that 20 seconds, you're connected, you're grounded again. And then another thing you can do is pressure back into a corner or on a corner of a wall. Pressing your spine onto anything and putting a little pressure there is going to help ground you, because it's going to get to your parasympathetic nervous system. And then another thing to do is you can put your hands under your arms and put pressure around your torso. Weighted blankets are really great, or even an actual sandbag, or you can create one with like an old sock and put like sand or oatmeal in a sock. You'll get a little heaviness, and anything that puts pressure around is going to help to cue you that it's time to self-regulate. Next slide. And we can go to the next one. Okay, so self-soothing is a little different than self-regulation. It's more internal. We are going to start with voice tone. So these are a few examples of sound-based techniques to help trigger your nervous system that you can go into parasympathetic. So you may have someone in your life who has a really soothing voice to you. You may remember a caregiver or a teacher whose voice just instantly calmed you. There might be other people from childhood, like Mr. Rogers. There's also some great poetry out there on YouTube. John Trudella, Native American activist, beautiful poetry, soothing voice. And then on the Calm app, there are these, some of you may have tried sleep stories, and any of you that are into the Calm app, I'd love to hear what your favorite sleep story is. Mine is the Matthew McConaughey one. I don't know why, but his voice is so calming to me. I literally fall asleep in 5 minutes. It's my go-to thing. And then middle ear music, you can Google that and lots of things will come up. What that's doing is when we get to the middle ear, all of these soothing voices and self-soothing things, this is all the stuff that ideally we would do with a small infant, right? Like shh, 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 when we're soothing someone. That sound gets to the middle ear and instantly tells our bodies, oh, we can self-soothe and self-regulate, we're safe. So that's why the sound-based things are a really quick way to go into self-soothing. And maybe we could try a little bit. I think we were gonna listen to one of these just to give you guys an experience of what this is like, and just notice as we're listening what's happening in your body.
Hey, this is Alexis. I just want to flag that we had some technical difficulties earlier in testing this video, but we will be sharing the slide deck widely with everyone after, and all of these links will be available. Apologies for that.
Okay, great. So we'll let you guys try that out on your own. Next slide. Okay, so this one has to do with some slow, gentle movement. And sometimes those of you that might already know a lot about your own experiences with sympathetic nervous system, so you might, usually most of us have kind of a go-to trauma response when we're feeling uncomfortable and threatened. And if it is to leave or flee, flight, to get away from a situation, sometimes we can honor what our body is telling us while still staying grounded and self-soothing. And that is to do some gentle movement. So we're going to try this with synchronized breath and hand gestures, or otherwise known as mudras from yoga. So I'm going to lead us through this. And if you guys want to do it with me, feel free. So you're going to inhale to the count of 4 as you slowly and gently close your fingers towards your palms. So we'll do that together. Inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. And we want to keep our thumbs soft. And as we go through the mudra, I will say the words, and then you can see on the slide when to inhale and exhale. So we'll go ahead and we'll inhale, hum, sa, so, hum, so, hum, hum, sa, so, hum, hum, sa, hum, sa, so, hum. So again, breath, sound, and slow movement, telling your body it's okay to self-soothe, and honoring maybe that little bit of energy that maybe wants to get away from a trigger or a situation. Next slide. So the other thing, simple, that we forget often is to breathe. Breath work is so key to self-soothing. So I'm going to lead you through another exercise with breath and just coming into some regular breathing after doing that more active breath work, because we did just breathe with movement and sound, and that was a little more activating. Now we're going to go a little bit slower into just breath work. So think about allowing joy to fill your being right now. It's Friday, you're here, find a little joy. Focus on the immediate feeling of joy as your heart leaps when you bring a beloved image to mind. It can be of nature, a friend, music, art, family, or any images that speak to you. In this actual moment of remembrance of joy that we're focusing on, really let this connection to the universal consciousness of joy happen. So keeping that image of nature, friend, music, family, any image that brings joy to you. We're going to breathe while remembering that image and hold the inhale for 4 counts. So if you can inhale with me. And then hold for 2. And then exhale for 6. Inhale for 4. Hold for 2. And exhale for 6. So you can repeat that several times. The 4-2-6 breath count is one that's been researched and studied to show that we can go into self-soothing relatively quickly after 3 to 5 breath rounds. This is a good one to do also if you're having trouble falling asleep or getting back to sleep. Next slide. Okay. place your hand on your heart now and begin to layer through the body, noticing your skin, fascia, bones, and heart, just right on that heart center. Allow yourself to be still with yourself for a moment and filled with a vibration of love for yourself and others. Even if your mind is busy, put the thoughts on an imaginary shelf and just keep focusing on your breath. Breathing, bring to your mind's eye an image and a thought of anything that evokes joy for you. So these are my dogs, Moxie and Bucky. And this was a joyful moment of them exploring our newly landscaped backyard. And they found some mud puddles and had matching mud mustaches and little socks on their feet. And that was a real moment where you could choose joy, or you could choose, oh no, I have to, this is something stressful because now I have to wash everything. So I put that in there just as a reminder. And thinking of my dogs is an instant moment of joy. And I'm sure you guys have special people in your lives, or animals, friends, family, or memories that can put that smile on your face. Next slide. So just to review about the nervous system, a lot of these responses are involuntary when we get dysregulated. But remember that your body is always seeking safety. So even if you do go into flight, fight, freeze, or submission, and it's maybe not what you're wanting to do, it's usually your body's attempt to seek safety. We need to find gratitude for that, because our bodies are amazing and they're wired to keep us safe. And be curious when maybe your response is different than what you expected. And sometimes you need to let that inner advocate have some rest and relax from time to time, because often in the jobs that you all have, you're constantly advocating for yourself and others. And maybe your advocate needs to rest so that you can get into parasympathetic and feel that sense of calmness and connection. Next slide. Okay, I think we've got another poll. So we're moving into resiliency and adaptation now, after we just learned more about how we're dealing with stress. So what do you hope will stay as a result of going through the pandemic? Remote work options, more flexibility at your job, less traffic, elbow bumps and air hugs. I know there's some people that like that better than handshakes. So go ahead and just think about what you'll hope, what's going to stay. Maybe there's some silver linings, some things that are helpful to us as human beings in terms of stress management. So go ahead and select your answers. And on this one, we've got all of the above.
And Amanda, while
Yes.
we're doing the poll, I do think we could open up the lines because we do have time. If anybody would like to ask questions or share how, they're doing, or what brings them joy, or where to get weighted blankets, we want to make sure that we're giving you what you need as well. And since we're good on time, we could open up the lines. So Amanda, I defer to you on when to do that.
Yeah, I think this is a good time for sharing. We can start that now before we go on to the next section. Okay, let's look. We've got the polling results, and it looks like people are most hoping for there to be less traffic, followed by remote work and more flexibility. And then we had quite a few responses actually to have all of the above. So I think it's important that we start to think about that. I think that gives me some hope to think about some of the positive things that have changed as a result of this. And so weighted blankets, I'm just looking at the chat box. There's some good ones on Amazon. And I've got mine here in the office. I can jump up and grab, I can't remember the name brand, but there are many you can get on Amazon. And there are some recommendations on how much you weigh and how much of a weighted blanket you should get, because you don't want to have it be too light or too heavy. But you can get them on Amazon, or I've even seen them at Target. Have there been any other questions in the chat box that I can answer?
So far, and folks, you're welcome to unmute yourselves as well. But so far, no other questions. I think people are very into sharing their own techniques in the chat, which is great. And what they're doing to find joy, like cooking and working out, aromatherapy, exercise, praying, things like that. So far we've got some good sharing across peers here. But I think I encourage anyone at this point in the webinar to unmute yourself and feel free to speak if you'd like.
I love laughing. Laughing is really good. And that's something that we do at our job. We laugh, we find things to laugh about because we work so intensely with our clients. We have to have moments to laugh. And that really is relieving when you laugh. So I wanted to share that.
Yes. Oh, so important, and nice that you guys are able to have that connection as coworkers too, and not feeling alone in dealing with this increased stress and needing to get so creative with what you're doing. Are there any things that you like to watch that are funny, like go to movies or YouTube videos if you just need a laugh?
We just, I'm just talking about for work. I laugh at home as well, but we just laugh at each other, like our different reactions, things where we're dealing with something and that kind of stuff. And laughing, I think it's a good stress reliever, and everything's not so intense.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have a pretty light group that we work with. So it helps. And because yesterday was kind of really stressful for me, and there was laughing going on and stuff like that. So I was able to get through it. And then also support from your supervisor to help in being able to identify when you're in a stressful time, for that person to be able to say, yeah, let's take it back a little bit and kind of breathe and that kind of stuff. And my supervisor does that. So
that's great. I'm so happy to hear that. Sometimes it's that acknowledgement of your reaction and encouraging you to make those adjustments and not kind of bypass them. Because sometimes when, it's pretty obvious when someone's distressed, and we often will, just bypass that. So I'm really glad your supervisor can notice those things and encourage those moments of self-regulation for you guys. And it sounds like there's a contagious laughter too, which is definitely happens, especially when you are joking around with one another and keeping it lighthearted. I'm so glad to hear that. I definitely miss that from working in a group doing outreach and being in the same space together. Thank you so much for sharing that. Any other self-soothing tricks that you guys have adapted through this time?
As
Okay.
people come up with ideas, though, feel free to share. We're really good on time, so please feel free to share as ideas come up.
So I don't know if this is kind of dark, but my self-soothing is true crime TV. So that's where I kind of disappear to. And I have podcasts, so sometimes I'll listen to my true crime podcasts at work on my little breaks, or when I'm in my car. And for some reason, I'm like, yeah, no, the world's not as bad.
Yeah, that's so funny. I feel like that's a common thing, at least I've found with people doing the work that we all do, because there's something about the fascination with the human psyche, but especially when it's a story like Law and Order. I used to watch Law and Order to decompress after working in a domestic violence shelter. And my sister was like, why do you watch that? You're dealing with something so hard all day. But I'm like, but in this episode, in 30 minutes, the crime gets solved and the person gets helped. And I don't always have that satisfaction with clients. So I think it is a container of sorts for us when we're fascinated by these stories. And maybe to your point, it's a little bit of comparing, well, at least what I'm dealing with isn't as stressful as whatever you might be watching. And yeah, there looks like some great suggestions of what to watch to get those, and put the true crime podcast in the chat box too.
So I'm just going to say with Patty mentioned unsolved mysteries. So for me, they have to be exactly like you say, Law and Order. I think I've binge watched every single one of them, but they have to be solved. I need resolution. So I can't watch like unsolved mysteries or ones that are like, where's the murderer now? Like it has to be like resolved, caught, case closed, that kind of thing.
That's awesome. I think I fall into that category with you. And I see also we've got some dancing going around, unapologetic dancing, not caring who's watching. Very, very good. That kind of movement. When we look at a lot of the nervous system work, we really have gotten that from studying the animal kingdom too, and shaking and moving rapidly is a way to discharge the stress energy. So if you can dance and maybe add some real shaking moves in there, it will help to move the stress response through the body, and also can just be joyful and fun. I know we've had some dance parties in my house where we'll start thinking about Prince and then start watching all these old Prince videos and just start dancing and having fun. So I think that's a great one. Dax Shepard's podcast, that's a great one too. Can be lighthearted and also learning some new things. I know a lot of people, book clubs, taking this time to learn something new has been something a lot of people have been trying. And the virtual book club is also a way to stay connected. And I know we get really burned out on being on Zoom or doing telehealth, but it is important to have that eye gaze and that focus with your friends in a book club or with family. If you can do FaceTiming, you can co-regulate and connect by really looking into someone's eyes, even over the video. So I know for me, I sort of balk at that if I have a lot of telehealth sessions that day, but I know it has a lot of meaning for maybe my father who's elderly to be able to actually FaceTime with him. Great. Well, let's go ahead and jump back into our the slides, because we're going to get a little bit more into the mindset of what you guys are talking about. I'm hearing a lot of adaptation and resiliency. In the slide before, I had a picture of a chameleon, and sometimes we'll talk about chameleons like someone's trying to fit in or doesn't have like a sense of identity, but actually chameleons are really good at adapting to a situation to stay safe. And obviously they, physically will turn the colors of wherever they are to blend in. But it's really part of their nervous system working to protect them. So I thought that was a kind of a powerful image to think of as we look at adaptation and resiliency. Next slide. So the concept of chasing behavior versus stretching behavior, I really wanted to take a moment. I feel like I'm probably in a room full of people who are very stretchy in their mindset, because I know the kind of work you do where you have to be very creative. But let me just go over really quickly what it looks like to notice if you're in chasing behavior or stretching behavior. So chasing behavior is always kind of trying to get more, and kind of the concept of more is more. I don't have what I need, so I'm gonna be upset about that and be chasing the next thing, or focusing on the lack of resources maybe I have to do my job. Another example of chasing behavior is FOMO, the fear of missing out, which I think is coming up for people as we've gone through these different reopenings and closing. If you do see on social media that maybe some of your friends have decided to go out and do things, but you've been really strict in quarantine, and you might feel like you're missing out because you're not out with friends, or maybe that brings up some emotions for you. But the FOMO, just feeling like you're missing out, is a feeling of chasing and not being in the moment, comparing yourself to others, and focusing on what you don't have, and scarcity mindset. Stretching behavior is something that can be learned, and it is a set of attitudes and skills that give you a simple and powerful shift from wanting more resources and embracing and acting on the possibilities of the resources that you already have at hand. So really trying to do more with less. The thing about these two behaviors is that you may kind of be sitting here going, I'm kind of more chasey or more stretchy as a default. But if you are having a stress response, it may affect that base response. So you could be someone before the pandemic that was really into chasing and trying to be in that mindset of more is more. Maybe now you're stretchier because you've had to learn to do things at home and have a slower pace of life. Or you could be someone who was more resourceful and adaptive, and now you're feeling this panic of chasing. I mean, I think some of the pandemic specific behaviors that we look at, where people were going and hoarding toilet paper in the beginning of the pandemic, which I've heard is starting to happen again, that's that chasey behavior, thinking that you're going to have a lack of resources, so you go into hoarding the toilet paper. So think about that as you reflect on how you've gotten through the pandemic so far. Next slide. So something else to think about, as some of us, really are having to deal with institutional culture at work and at school. We are naturally born resourceful, and it's usually what the stress of an institution that will stamp out the stretchiness and get us to not think outside of the box as much. It's usually that the strict container of an institution. And some of you may be surprised at how stretchy your organization has gotten, because they had to quickly go to remote work, or go from remote work to back to in-person or a hybrid, and having to be really flexible with that. So, if you ever want to observe stretchiness, watch children playing. You can give a kid a pot, and the pot can be a drum, or it can be a hat, or it can be a way to make a sandcastle. And as adults, we often just look at the pot and think we have to cook something in it. So if you ever need inspiration for stretchiness, watch some kids in the playing together. Next slide. So another way to really check in with how you're adapting and being resilient through this time is to look at the concepts of joy and meaning. So joy sometimes can be a hard thing to really, we often will just think of happiness versus joy, but a way to find joy is to express gratitude. And Brene Brown has this great quote, "There is no joy without gratitude." I have started to work with people on that when they're kind of spiraling into anxiety or depression or hitting that pandemic wall, just to stop and take in some gratitude. Just list 3 things that you're grateful for and see if that can shift and open up a little joy. So if you want to put in the chat box something you're grateful for, and see if that can shift for you, especially as we're rounding the corner to the holidays. A lot of times we think about gratitude. Next slide. So something else that's been at play as we've gone through the different phases of quarantining is really grief and loss. I think in the beginning, especially, and as we're going in maybe to a second wave, we can have the same stages that we might have with any death or loss that we might be going through as humans. So we have denial, anger, bargaining, sadness, and acceptance. And I think I've cycled through these a few times over the last few months. And even right now, as they were rolling out the new curfew, I found myself kind of being in denial and like questioning it and wondering about the effectiveness and how much it's going to affect me, and being annoyed, trying to think of, okay, well, what does this mean? How can I still maybe socialize, or at what point is my risk mitigation? How am I doing with that? Feeling sad about, not seeing family on the holidays. And I've had to accept, like, yeah, it's really not going to happen. We're not going to be in the same house. Recently, David Kessler added a 6th stage to the stages of grief and loss. This may be familiar to some of you, and that's meaning. So we're now looking at anything that's difficult. It is to really look at how are we finding meaning in the situation. Next slide. So this one, I want you to be a little self-reflective for a moment. This is a quote from Viktor Frankl. He's the founder of existentialism, and he is a man who survived a concentration camp and went on to be a psychiatrist. So when we think about what we're going through, and some of you may have gone through some really tough times before and have experience with this, but even in the most difficult times that we've had in humanity, we can always try to find meaning if we try. He says, in the space between suffering and finding meaning, you can begin to visualize being halfway through a crisis. You can start asking yourself, what meaning am I finding? What meaning are you finding in going through quarantine and remote work and all of these transitions? Take a moment to reflect what meaning you're finding and put a comment in the chat box. The space between suffering and finding meaning. Wow, powerful stuff coming up in the chat box. perseverance, stronger than we think we are, sacrifice, identity. Who are you as a human being more than being a student or being defined by our jobs? Patience. Yes, lots of good stuff there. Understanding, finding your voice, thinking about what your voice is. Thank you guys for taking that moment to reflect. And I don't know about you, but even just reading those things, I feel that sense of calm coming over me, thinking about really what the meaning of all of this is, especially as we round the end of 2020. I am a human being who deserves to be in joy. That's a great mantra. I'm not my career. I'm not my hourly pay. I am a human being who deserves to be in joy. That's awesome. I think that should be our mantra. Very good. Okay, next slide. So, searching for joy. I just loved this picture, and thinking of the times where I have been angry and denial and bargaining and trying to figure out what I can do. And then seeing this lady who, the story I told myself about this picture was that she's heavily quarantined in an assisted living facility and hasn't seen her family for months. She's got her mask on and her pink sunglasses and her pom-poms, and she's finding a moment of joy. And I think about being in that situation in quarantine, and I feel overwhelmed by just the despair that could be there. But this woman is having fun, and looks like she's even maybe dancing a little bit. So if you can just really try to focus on feeling joy fully and being alive, even if it's just for a moment. It may not be realistic to be completely happy and fulfilled right now, but maybe you can find a moment of joy. And that's kind of what I want to leave you with, is that you kind of put on these pink shaded sunglasses symbolically and search for joy. Look for it in the little things, your dog's getting muddy in the backyard, kids playing, a great show on Netflix, just feeling fully alive, human, and joyful. Okay, I think that's it, right? Unless we want to have any more questions or answers, I think we're almost out of time.
Yes, no, I think I would like to open it up though. There may be some folks who have other ways and other things they want to share. So thank you so much, Amanda. That was a lot of information, I know, but also we wanted to make sure that everybody had enough to grab onto, right? I know that's your tack, is I can give you this and give you that and take what you need from the menu, as it were. So I think that was really, really helpful and so encouraging. And I know that others will join me in saying thank you. And it's hard to do these virtually because this is the exact kind of setting where we would want to socialize afterwards and toast to things and hug each other. And so I think this is a great example of how, we can be in the moment and find some joy. And I want to thank everybody who joined today, because I know this was hard to carve out the time. And I know that it might have been hard to prioritize, or maybe you just figured, nope, I'm done. I'm prioritizing this, and that's good too. So we're just so grateful for the work you do. It's really important and incredible and noteworthy. And so if there are other ideas for webinars that you would like to see in this way, please do contact us. but I would like to give just a second round of applause to Amanda officially from here.
Thank you.
And also, if you would like to contact her directly, her information is there, and these slides will be available to you and the recording if you missed something as well. And I just want to say thank you to everyone. We are so grateful for the work that you do, but I know that the Pathways clients and frankly their families and the people that you're helping in all the ways you do are exceedingly grateful this year. So if no one is telling you that, just know that we are very grateful for what you do. And that's it from us today. But we will be sending out an evaluation, and we would love to hear from you about any other webinar ideas that you think are necessary or that you would like to see. And I hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday, and we hope that you can practice some of this over the next week or so. Amanda, any last words?
Just thank you for all you do. You guys hang in there and find those moments. Just find the moments of joy and self-soothing, because you deserve it. Got to put yourself first.
Amen. All right, y'all, we'll be in touch. Have a wonderful holiday season. Thank you. Thank you again.